Thank you very much indeed. Christian Fraser reporting there. Well, now the Conservatives, Labour and the Lib Dems have all taken your questions on this programme. Today it is the turn of UKIP, and I'm glad to say I'm joined by Mark Reckless. Thank you very much for being with us. So taking a break from the campaign trail to talk to us and really to talk to the viewers, because viewers have been sending in lots of questions. And the first one comes from Justin Anderson, who says there won't be enough working adults to fund the pensions of retiring baby boomers. Isn't immigration the only answer to that?
Well, I think we have a lot of people who are working a lot later in life than they were, partly because of the age structure, but also because we're not as well off as a country as we thought we were 10 years ago. That boom was built on candy floss, and people are having to work well into their 70s in many cases, sometimes even later, just to make ends meet. Their pensions aren't giving them what they expected, and we need to look after that generation.
But Justin's question, I think, is immigration, well, he says, is the only answer to funding that kind of pension problem.
But immigrants grow old as well, so it's at best a temporary sticking plaster. And even for that, I don't think the benefit really is that significant. What we need to do is to be encouraging more of our own people back to work, and it's very, very difficult for young people in this country, and indeed for many older people, trying to move up the career ladder or get a pay rise if employers are just able to import labour from sort of countries with much cheaper wages, who work very hard, but it does make it very difficult for people competing.
Now, a question from Ian Gillis-Bell about what might happen after the election. A lot of speculation, of course, surrounding what happens after May the 7th. It says, if we are looking at another coalition, would UKIP work with David Cameron? What was the exact position on that?
Well, we said we don't want to go into a coalition.
So definitely no coalition.
Correct. David Cameron, like Ed Miliband, has at least promised an EU referendum, and what we would want to do is hold him to the straight and narrow and make sure that's a fair EU referendum, because Nick Clegg's saying, well, he would want EU citizens to vote, he'd want 16-year-olds to vote and all this, and we don't want that. We want only UK nationals and only people of the proper age to be voting in that referendum. And if we are there and actually, putting some pressure on, there's a much better chance of a fair referendum on Europe than the stitch-up that I suspect Cameron and Clegg.
So you'd support his government just if he went along with the referendum plans as they're currently constituted? You wouldn't demand that it was brought forward and made earlier?
Well, our key issue is the referendum, and we would like to see that as soon as possible. We'd have a discussion over a timing along with other issues, but we would insist that was a fair referendum with fair spending limits on both sides, without having sort of EU institutions and various others coming in and trying to rig our democracy. It should be a fair contest. That's what we'd insist on, and we'd like to see it as soon as possible.
OK. Samuel Reardon says, what do UKIP want to do about the rise of Muslim extremists in the United Kingdom?
Well, we want to have one country which sort of integrates people. I think the problem with a multicultural sort of model is the celebration of difference has, I think, too often been at the expense of what should be knitting us together. And we need to have a civic patriotism that makes people proud to be British and offers an alternative to these radical, very, very nasty ideologies that wish us such harm. And that is partly a sort of policing job, but it's also about believing in Britain, as we say in our manifesto, being proud of our nationality and our country and our tolerance and what we are, and making that something which everyone wants to be part of.
We've got a question from Maurice Hankey. I've seen millions wasted while working for local government. What will you do to change that? Really a question of waste in local government, I suppose, in Whitehall as well. What's your view on that?
And I think there has been waste in local government, and you make the comparison with Whitehall. And what I would say is the cuts in local government have been an awful lot deeper than they have in most of central government. I actually think the further you get away from the people you're actually meant to be serving, the less efficient and sometimes even corrupt that government can become. And local government, I feel, generally is rather more responsive to people than some of the central government, still less the European Union and those transnational bodies. So I would say we do understand there are a need for sort of further reductions in spending, but we don't support the sort of Tories in wanting to put that into such an ideological way or to cut deeper than necessary. And we would look at areas like overseas aid, where we're spending £1 billion a month, our contributions to the EU 10 to 20 billion a year, the 7 billion extra spent on Scotland, and we will make some savings in those areas, as well as abolishing some government departments and getting rid of some of the green subsidies, so that we wouldn't have to see such deep cuts in other areas, although we do want to see efficiencies made.
A question about London runway extension. Oliver Roach-Clark says, how do you propose to solve the London runway debate to enable extra capacity?
Well, firstly, we are opposed to the preposterous plans for a Thames estuary airport put forward by bonkers Boris over many years, and frankly have been slowing up the debate and getting in the way of a sensible decision. We would also like to see proper use made of Manston, which has an enormously long runway. It is very close to the HS1 line and could be used certainly for more in the way of freight and for some sort of low-cost airlines, and we would like to see that part of the mix, at least to relieve capacity elsewhere. And we support the Davis Commission and the work it's doing in terms of making the case for Heathrow and Gatwick, and we think a decision should be made quickly.
Well, and which way would you think of going, Heathrow or Gatwick?
Well, historically, I've been quite a supporter of Gatwick. I've made the case, actually, for persuading them to go in and sort of at least make the case for a second runway. And I think the big attraction of that is it would bring in proper competition between Gatwick and Heathrow, and that is something that would be attractive, although I do understand some of the economic arguments that Heathrow makes as well.
Since you're here at the BBC, Philip Marsden's got a question about the licence fee, which Nigel Farage has been talking about, reducing it, I think, to a third of what it is. He says, why don't you scrap the TV licence fee completely?
Well, that would be one possibility, and we could move to a subscription model. And what I'd like to say is I don't think this is in any sense bashing the BBC. I think the BBC provides extraordinarily valuable and impressive output over a number of fields, and is one of the great assets of our nation. And in some ways, actually, if you set the BBC free from the licence fee, it might actually be better able to make the most it could in the overseas markets of some of actually the unique abilities that it has. But we do think the licence fee is an awful lot for some sort of poorer households, and in particular imprisoning people if they don't pay it we think is wrong. It should be civil penalties only, and we would be looking at least to bear down on the licence fee, and Nigel set out some areas perhaps where the BBC shouldn't be focusing quite as much, although we do appreciate the current affairs and the public services content.
All right, well, it was really good to have you here in the studio with us. Thank you so much for your time, Mark Reckless. We'll let you get back to the campaign trail. Thank you. Now, let's tell you the Times just slipped.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.